week's episode of Stardust Crusaders almost seems like it's going to be a real serious episode, because it opens up with one of the first major scenes featuring Dio. It's kind of surprising that the main villain of the entire series has been shrouded in mystery for so long, and at the very beginning this week, we get a very nice lengthy scene with him and Whole Horse, where Whole Horse is going to let him know that a few of the other people like Mariah and Alessi have been defeated by Jotaro and his friends. And Dio, of course, seems pretty indifferent to just about everything. His face is still covered in shadow, and it seems like his body is still trying to, connect to his head. It seems like only half of his body is actually healing correctly. There's this scene where it almost seems like Whole Horse is about to kill Dio, when suddenly he appears right behind him and completely freaks him out. The scene is also really nice because as soon as it pans out, you can see that it almost seems like Whole Horse is actually caught in the spider webs. Then, as soon as the intro is done, we get to find out that Whole Horse is going to be teaming up with, of all people, Boingo from the Oingo Boingo Brothers. Love him or hate him, the Oingo Boingo Brothers certainly did a great job of injecting some ridiculous humor into JoJo, and they did that this week. Just Boingo's introduction was hilarious. The fact that he had him trapped in a suitcase with duct tape over his mouth, and as soon as he removed that, he started throwing up all over the place. Just typical, nasty, gross-out gag stuff that we're used to seeing in Stardust Crusaders. But the first half of the episode is basically just Whole Horse having to come to terms with the fact that Boingo's powers are ridiculous, and no matter what it says in that comic book, it's going to be true. Even if it means Whole Horse actually drop-kicking a woman. Yeah, that happens in this week's episode. However, there's always that little twist with the story that we don't know. There's a scene where there's this woman walking by with this guy, and Whole Horse reluctantly runs up to her, ends up kicking her in the back of the head, and that's because there is a scorpion that was getting ready to sting her. I don't know why he went about such violent and ridiculous methods to kill the scorpion, but it makes for a really funny scene, and that's when he's fully convinced at that point that they are going to be able to defeat Jotaro and his friends. The last bit of the episode is again where he has to try and realize that no matter what the book says, it's going to come true. And what it is he's going to run into the group of Jotaro and his friends. And the book says that Whole Horse is going to have to put his fingers up Polnareff's nose, and that's going to somehow knock out Jotaro and his friends, which will give him the opportunity to kill them. Now, it almost seems like that's going to go down when suddenly Polnareff appears right next to Whole Horse with Silver Chariot, and this is like an amazingly tense moment, because obviously Polnareff really has it out for Whole Horse, and this could have been like his perfect opportunity to have a big battle with him, and it almost seems like he's getting ready to finish him off when Whole Horse finally reluctantly decides that he's going to have to put his fingers in Polnareff's nose, and it's a really funny scene. I really can't do it justice. It's just something you have to see for yourself, and it really rounds out this ridiculous episode. So what's the rundown? On this week's episode of Stardust Crusaders, this was a goofy-ass episode of the series, despite the fact how it opened up. Once you realize that Boingo was going to be teaming up with Whole Horse, it was laugh riots from that point on. And it's a really interesting combination for these two characters. And I like the fact that we basically got to see these two groups who were a member of two-man teams, and now they were separated and they had to join together again. I think that's awesome. Just the way they brought back Boingo, though, is just absolutely ridiculous. The way they describe it, how he basically just kidnapped him and put him in a suitcase and they flew on a plane and he got all airsick and ended up throwing up in the cab. That was just a ridiculous scene right there. But this week's episode did have some really good animation, some really good style, and it was just funny seeing that final scene when he was sticking his fingers up his nose. How that's going to follow up in the next episode, I have no idea. All I know is this was a pretty interesting episode for a number of reasons. One, we got all that humor, but we also learned that Joseph Joestar's daughter is actually dying. She's almost a couple days away from death, so that means they are really going to have to increase their search, and that also means we're getting even closer to the finale of Stardust Crusaders. The other big thing, of course, is Dio's vulnerability. We know that one half of his body is completely vulnerable, and I'm sure that's going to come into play when they actually start battling him, and considering there's only so many opponents left, that's going to be coming very soon. I cannot wait to see Jotaro versus Dio. That's definitely, I think, going to be one of the highlights of the entire series. But this episode right here was just really fun. If you liked the Oingo Boingo Brothers, if you liked Whole Horse, it's great to see them working together. They're very interesting characters, and this is, again, another one of those episodes that just reinforces the fact that Stardust Crusaders is a really great comedy, just as well as being a really good action series. So this was a fun episode, but it really didn't blow me away too much. Just a very simple comedy episode of Stardust Crusaders with some fan-favorite characters. It did have another ending sequence, which was very similar to the very first Oingo Boingo Brothers, except now that he's been replaced with Whole Horse. And Whole Horse's design in the comic just looks ridiculous, especially with the big nose. So this episode right here for me is a 3 out of 5. Check it out, JoJo fans. It was a pretty good episode. Thank you guys for watching my review. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. And before you guys leave, make sure to tell me what you thought about this week's episode of Stardust Crusaders. Are you glad to see that Boingo has returned and that he's teamed up with Whole Horse? What do you want to see from the rest of the Stardust Crusaders anime series? Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Follow us on social media. And thank you guys again for watching. And as always, stay dandy, baby!